All right, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. And as per normal, go ahead and start with the news of the week. This is the news for July 24th, the week of July 24th. And the first item is that after a number of years of price increases for solar and wind, of course, under what's known as power purchase agreements, where companies are buying production from these facilities, the prices seem to have stabilized. In fact, for the first time in a couple of years, we've seen the prices actually decrease for solar power purchase agreements. It's down 1% from Q1 to Q2. The price increases over the last few years have largely been due to delays with interconnection, some of the supply chain disruptions, essentially all of these factors coming into where supply was outstripped by demand. So of course, prices keep going up. Wind power purchase agreements continue to go up. However, they're up 13% in the first quarter of this year, and that's 30%. The cost of this wholesale electricity up 30% year over year. For over the past 2 years, solar wholesale prices have gone up about 17%. So that's good news if you're selling it, bad news if you want the cost of electricity to come down. There's a new study by the Rocky Mountain Institute that projects that about 1/3 of all of the global electricity is going to be serviced through wind and solar by the year 2030. This is up from about 12%, which is currently being served by wind and solar. And it's anticipated, of course, that the solar share of the market will continue to grow and grow dramatically. In fact, currently, solar is the lowest cost form of electricity. It wholesales at about $40 per megawatt hour, which is, about 4 cents a kilowatt hour. And they're anticipating by 2030, that will drop in half to about $20 per megawatt hour. So as the price cuts in half, demand is going to go up. Record heat in the state of Texas has led to record electric demand. And in fact, on July 12th, at 4:55 p.m. in the afternoon, I always say the zombie apocalypse will happen on a hot August afternoon. They did hit record demand of 81.4 gigawatts. This is beating the record set about 2 weeks earlier on June 27th of 81 gigawatts of demand in Texas. And there would have been, according to ERCOT, a crash of the electric grid in Texas had it not been for wind and solar, because during these periods of high demand, there was actually very high winds and very bright sunlight. So actually wind and solar exceeded their nameplate capacity, and the fact that the reserve capacity had been used up, it was overseen or basically subsidized by this excess capacity of renewable energy. I'm sure we'll hear a report on Fox News about that. One thing that we see is that the spot prices of electricity, this is like moment to moment cost of electricity if you have to go out and buy it on the wholesale market. Well, as an example, during these peak demands, we see amazing shifts in spot prices. On July 11th, for example, the spot price, the wholesale price was about $84 per kilowatt hour. That's about twice what's normal, a little bit less. $84. But then on July 11th, on July 12th, during that peak demand, it shot up to $1,372 per megawatt hour, or basically $14 per kilowatt hour wholesale cost. So that was the cost that ERCOT was having to pay when they went out to buy electricity from the marketplace on that peak demand period. Jobs in the U.S. solar market did increase in 2022 by about 3.5%. Doesn't really tell the whole picture. What we did see, according to the IREC, the Interstate Renewable Energy Commission, I think, not commission, committee, council. Anyway, they found that the residential segment of the industry saw about 11% growth in jobs, while the utility scale actually saw a decline in jobs of about 6,000 jobs nationwide. Again, we can put the blame on that to interconnection delays. There were a lot of these projects that had been scheduled that were delayed because they simply could not get permission to connect to the grid. Solar jobs did grow in about 42 states. Led by California, New York in second place, Texas in third, Florida fourth, and Massachusetts fifth in creating solar jobs. The marketplace for people entering the industry, very tight. In fact, 44% of companies surveyed who are trying to hire have said it is extremely difficult to find qualified people to fill these positions. New research by the Department of Energy, working with the University of Toledo, has found that for the first time, it looks like bifacial perovskite solar cells are going to be a thing. They outperformed monofacial. What they have found is that while the front of these panels that were tested were producing about 23% efficiency, they could, through reflected light, generate another about 91 to 93% of that 23% efficiency was obtained through the back of the panel. So they're anticipating, of course, these bifacial panels will generate about 10 to 20% more than monofacial. So all they have to do is keep the price 20% less, or not be 20% more than monofacial, and it will be a savings. And the race is on. AI has entered into the world of solar installation. There are two companies that have announced they've designed and are testing robotic solar installation systems. These robotic systems are designed by a company called Terabase Energy, another one called Sarcos Energy. And these are primarily for utility scale ground-mounted systems. And they do allow for 24/7 construction. Terabase has a unit they call the TerraFab, of course. And this unit, they claim, will install about 1 gigawatt of solar a year, fully autonomous from human interaction. The first units are supposed to be installed and operational by the end of next year. So that's interesting. I don't know, good, bad, who knows? But that's a direction things are going into. And that is the news from the solar industry for this week. Did anybody have anything they'd like to add into that mix? Yeah, Pete, you've got something?
Yes, would you go back to that peak electricity price in Texas on July 12th?
Sure.
I think you reported $1,400 a megawatt hour.
Yeah.
That's $1.40 a kilowatt hour. I believe I heard you say $140 kilowatt hour. That's $1.40.
$1.40, is that right? My brain's
1,400 divided by 1,000, megawatt divided by 1,000.
That sounds right. So instead of about 5 cents, you're paying about $1.40.
Right. Yeah. I believe you said $140 a kilowatt hour.
Did I? I think I said $14. So either 14, way, I was off by a decimal. Either way, it's a lot. We ran into some of these situations where a lot of people have contracts where they're paying wholesale plus, so that's their rate structure. So what you found is that a lot of people during the last crisis were getting electric bills of $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 for the month because their costs were related to whatever it cost ERCOT to buy the power. So that can be pretty dramatic to see how your electric bill gets affected. Anybody else have any comments? Any additional items there? Go ahead and jump into some of the events coming up. There is a webinars. These are primarily webinars that have passed across. One today, I guess, at 2 o'clock on NEP 3-phase microinverter systems, if you're so inclined. There's another one tomorrow. This is on the Solarc system. If you want to, this is a good system if you're going to think about going off grid. and it is offered by Renvu. They have a good series of webinars. On the 26th, tomorrow, 8 p.m., there's Solar United Neighbors has one on nonprofits and how to take advantage of the solar incentives that are now available through the Inflation Reduction Act. Then there's one on energy communities. Again, another thing trying to interpret how the Inflation Reduction Act tax benefits impact. That's on the 27th. One on navigating the NEC 690. That's the section of the code that deals with photovoltaics. That's on the 27th at 2. Then we have one on microinverters that hook up to 4 different panels. That's on August 2nd. One on arc-resistant fabrics. This is interesting. Keep yourself alive there, August 9th. Then August 16th, there's an online industry event that's taking place. So if it's called Shaping the Future of Solar Together. If you want to log into that, you can check that one out. And then again, thought I would mention our courses that are coming up. We do have a course coming up at Zane State in August. This is the 6-day face-to-face course. These are the certification courses. Then there are a couple other courses coming up in September. I know we've got one in Marietta. These hybrid courses where we do 46 hours of online training, and then we do face-to-face Zoom meetings once a week. And after 6 weeks of that, we get together for 2 days, do the hands-on portion, the examination portion. So there's one in Marietta, there's one at Hiram College, one over near Cincinnati. That's through the University of Dayton at MELink. And then there'll be another one in Marietta. So that's self-serving and advertising, but those are courses that are available to everybody. Before I jump into our topic of the week here, anybody have anything they want to bring up or questions, concerns, issues they had on the job this week? Not, hopefully it's solar related. Not somebody ate your sandwich in the refrigerator. So,
yes. This is Larry Lampman.
Yep.
I'm interested. I acquired 170 solar panels recently that have a little bit of age on, but are actually tested out pretty well. And I'm interested in starting a mini solar farm. Could you direct me as to where I would go to get information about how to do that?
A mini solar farm. What state are you in, Larry?
Massachusetts, but I'm right next to New York.
Yeah, are you talking about then using this for yourself or trying to sell it as a power purchase agreement?
Trying to sell it as a power purchase.
Okay, and are you a member of the Farm Bureau by chance?
Yes.
Yeah, I would talk to them first.
Okay.
That'd be a good first step. I know at least here in Ohio, the Farm Bureau has been involved in helping farmers negotiate, interconnection, power purchase agreements, things of that nature. Even those, a lot of, 177 panels is a lot of panels. It may not be a lot when you're in this world of utility scale.
Yeah, that's why I use the word mini. Yes.
Yeah, it would definitely be a mini. And it may prove that the connection itself, the process to go through interconnection, may be too much, cost too much to make it effective. But what you may be able to do is find a commercial customer for this, as opposed to going down the power purchase route. 177 panels is really kind of a, relatively large system, but not out of the realm of just a commercial customer having a system that meets their own needs.
Yeah, small company, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could, and maybe even talk to your local school or something like that. Who knows? But
okay, thank you.
Or a church, whatever. So, all right.
Well, there's excuse me for interrupting. Community solar is something that I thought I would look into. A group of houses, perhaps, or something like that.
Yeah. Again, you may find yourself running up against regulations, because essentially at that point you become a utility company, and I know it's possible, but it may be the cost of the lawyers may dissuade you from getting involved in that.
Yes. Thank you.
Sure thing. Anybody else have anything?
Yeah, this is Mike Strang.
Yep, go ahead.
I want to install a solar on my house for my own use. And I've seen a couple, I'll call them kits, that supposedly you can install it yourself and plug it in. Is there any information that you know of on the internet here that would give me some more information about the type of panels I should buy and how to control it and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of good information. Of course, I'd say the best information comes from me, but that's even more self-serving than I want to be. but there's, we have the online courses that give you a bit of introduction into that. But you can find information. What size house are you talking about? Because these kits, just the word kit worries me. I know there are some that are designed for RVs and little sheds and things like that, and those are fine. But if you're talking about a house, you're kind of stepping up to the next level, and kits probably wouldn't do it.
I've got, I don't want to glue anything or nail anything to my roof. I've never heard any really good comments about that, but I have a deck that's covered, and it's about 20 by 30, and I looked for a standard size of panel and really didn't see one, but I think I can put like 16 of them out there. And I want to use it mostly for backup power. So I want to put a battery with it, and instead of buying a generator, I'm out in the country, so I have 1,000-gallon propane tank in the ground, and I could buy a generator for a decent one, and the controls are about 10 grand, right? But I would, you can run out of propane, but
Sure.
Mostly you don't run out of sun. And if I have both of them, I figure I'm in pretty good shape.
I would sort of lead you towards, if you're thinking about doing it yourself, which it sounds like you are, then I would lead you towards the N-phase system, because it's just simple and easy, and an Iron Ridge ground mounted system. So if you look up some videos on YouTube about how to install an Iron Ridge ground mounted racking system, which is very easy to do, and something a do-it-yourselfer can certainly do. And then look at an N-phase, how to install your own N-phase system. There are a lot of folks out there who have put out videos on how to do that. Then that would be my first step. But it sounds like I can guarantee it's not going to be as simple as maybe the whole thing is not going to be as cheap and simple if you want to do it properly. You can cobble something together and it may or may not work. But if you're really looking for a system that's going to last 25 years, you're gonna spend some money. And especially if you're talking about adding batteries and auto disconnect switches and things of that nature, each one of those pieces of equipment, like the auto disconnect system or switch in N-phase, is going to cost you like $2,000. A battery system is going to add $8,000 or $9,000 to do that. If you do just a simple grid tied system, you can do it pretty cheap and pretty efficiently yourself. But when you start adding these other components for resiliency, the price adds up pretty quickly.
Jay.
Yeah.
I can talk to him, offline and whatnot.
Okay.
Who's that?
Joe Upper Jesse.
Yeah, Joe, if you put your contact details in the chat, then you guys can connect. But I would say that doing it for your home, maybe not your first step. Play around with it a little bit, make a solar generator, that kind of thing. It's always like your first construction project should probably not be to build your own home. It should probably be to build a birdhouse and then work your way up. So.
And I did my own N-phase too. So
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right,
the N-phase system, if you know AC electricity, it's a pretty straightforward process.
Well, not to be bragging, but I'm a graduate engineer, civil,
Me too.
and I always I, on a construction site, and I've spent many, I don't want to say years, but many months. And it always tickled me that the electrical engineers think they know more than everybody else. Now that may not be, I don't want to piss anybody off, but that was my learning, I guess. But my major was construction management, and I've seen a lot of construction. So it doesn't scare me. The only thing that scares me is probably when I throw the switch. I don't want to be very close to the endpoints. So, and
well, you're probably going to need to have an electrician. I'm not sure with Massachusetts requirements, but that final connection to the grid typically requires you have an electrician do that.
well, I have no intention of ever connecting to anything, but probably a manual switch when the power goes out. I don't know if you've seen them, but the state fair here in Ohio is coming up, and I usually manage to make it to the big event put on Farm Science Review, and these guys are always there where you replace your meter on the outside with a plug in, and then you put the meter back. An electrician's got to do that, or I'm in a Union Rural Electric, so they're cooperative, and so I don't plan on getting very fancy. I just want to use it, and maybe if I buy an electric car, maybe I'll get a little fancier, but not yet.
Okay, well, it might be worthwhile, given you're thinking sort of more off grid, to look at that Solarc webinar, because I know a lot of folks use that.
When is that?
The Solarc webinar through Renvu. It's coming up in a day or two. I just mentioned previous here in the video.
Okay.
So, all
anyway,
right, well,
Joe, I'll call you later on, maybe today or tomorrow if you're free.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
I'm going to jump into the batteries here, and we'll talk a little bit, because we have had a lot of discussion about battery systems, case in point. And I just thought it was raised as an issue a week or two ago about charging lead acid versus lithium ion. And so I thought I would just do a little bit of a more basic tutorial about the batteries, battery systems, how they integrate, what we're dealing with here. So I'm sure I haven't caught all of the bits around them. If somebody wants to add to it as we move forward, that'd be great. But the two main types of batteries that we're dealing with, lead acid batteries as well as lithium ion batteries, I know there are various formulations or chemical compositions for different lithium ions, each one having advantages and disadvantages. Similarly, there are different structures for lead acid, sealed, gel, whatever. So I'm not drilling down that deep here. But those are the two main types. What you'll find as we transition to lithium ion batteries is that a lot of what they're looking at is that the weight, that's one of the advantages of lithium ion. You get better energy density for the weight. You also have better capacity as far as you can use the whole amount of power that's within the battery. With lead acid batteries, you're typically going to be limited to a depth of discharge, oftentimes set at around 50% depth of discharge. So if you've got a 100 amp hour battery, you're only really being able to use about 50 amp hours of that. Whereas with lithium ion, you can use a substantially greater portion of the battery storage capacity in actual usable power. There's also a thing known as internal losses. For example, with a lead acid battery, 100 watts of power coming in translates to about 85 watts going out because of the internal losses there. And with lithium ion, you don't have that same level of capacity loss. You can also get many more cycles through a lithium ion battery. They're typically going to last much longer. And in terms of years, they'll also last significantly longer than lead acid. So even though the upfront cost might seem more for a lithium ion battery, the over the life, the usable power, the costs are really in the advantage of lithium ion, which is why we're transitioning, clearly. When we talk about battery capacity, there are some terms that float around. Sometimes we use these things and thinking we're understood when maybe we're not. The battery capacity, if you think about volts and amp hours, the storage capacity of a lead acid battery has traditionally been measured in amp hours. And since energy is watt hours, and the power equation, volts times amps equals watts, we would just take, for instance, in this example, if we have a 12-volt battery, 100 amp hour capacity, then that will generate 1,800 watt hours. So, at its most simple, you could say, oh, I've got a 60-watt light bulb that's going to run, and I'm sure I'm going to get a decimal place off here somewhere, but 60-watt light bulb's going to run 300 hours. Did I get that right? Or 30 hours. Anyway, I am decimally challenged. So anyway, that's the most simple, but it's not going to work that way because you've got depth of discharge issues, things of that nature. But what we find with the lithium ion batteries, especially the ones that we have within solar systems like the Tesla Powerwall, something like that, they're often rated in kilowatt hours. They just do the math for you. They take the voltage times the amp hour capacity, and they give you what the amount of capacity is. So you'll often see, for instance, the Powerwall referred to as its 13 kilowatt hours. Now you have to say, is that 13 kilowatt hours of usable power or not? Is that just its nameplate power? So we'll touch on that here in just a second as well. So what are some of the other issues there? Well, of course, I mentioned with lead acid, you've got depth of discharge, usually going to be around 50%, whereas the depth of discharge for lithium ion is going to be 80 to 100%. You can sometimes use as much as 100% of the battery. The internal losses, also known as round trip efficiency. Lead acid, you're going to lose 15% of the power going in, coming out. With lithium ion, only about 2%. So if we look at the spec sheet, for example, I mentioned about the usable power versus the non-usable power. So on this spec sheet here, this is a LG Chem battery. So just to show you some of these, like the Resu 6.5, typically they're going to show what is the nameplate capacity. So in this case, you're talking about Resu 6.5. That's a 6.5 kilowatt hour battery, but only 5.9 kilowatts of usable power. So here you're talking maybe only a 90% depth of discharge on that. The Resu 10, excuse me, that's a 9.8, but you're only getting 8.8 usable. So when you're buying these, you got to make sure you're talking usable versus nameplate. Here they're telling you what the voltage is. This is a 48 volt battery, and it's got the nominal voltage 51.8. So it's telling you, it's doing the math, telling you what the amp hours are if you need that. Also giving you the dimensions and the weight, and you're talking about, in this case, UL 1973 certified for that. Another thing to bear in mind with lithium ion batteries is typically there's more involved than just the battery. We're used to just going out and buying a battery. With lithium ion, there's the charge controlling, the energy management system that's part of it. Often an inverter is going to be built into it. So the whole battery system is something that you're going to be buying. And typically now they're all one manufacturer. They're part of a component. And largely that's because the standards now require that not only does it have to pass 1973 for the battery itself, but there's another standard that is looking at how all of these various components in the battery system interact with each other. So how does the battery charge? Well, with lead acid, we're used to, those of you who've gone through my classes, we talk about, there's bulk charging, absorption, float, and then once a month there's an equalization, because lead acid basically is sulfuric acid. Sulfur builds up in the battery, and so you end up having to, I always think of it like a self-cleaning oven, where all of a sudden it sort of goes into extreme overcharging, boils all the electrolyte, cleans out some of that solidified sulfur, the sulfation that takes place within the battery, and it's giving it a good cleaning. And that happens about once a month with lead acid batteries. So if you have one of those systems, you may hear the battery bubbling back in the back of your garage, thinking something's going wrong, but it's just basically cleaning itself. Now, if you look at this chart closely, you're going to see that it is kind of a constant current, constant voltage, not totally constant voltage, but pretty close. This is the way that lithium ion batteries charge, by the way, is what's referred to as constant current, constant voltage. So for example, here, I didn't change that to, it says lead acid, but we're talking lithium ion, where you essentially get constant current coming in through the charger, similar to bulk charging. So I'm going to dump, if I've got a, 50 amp charger, I'm going to dump 50 amps into it until it reaches a certain set point. That's typically the set point voltage of the system. Well, the battery's not full, but it's reached its voltage. Now we go into what's called a constant voltage charging process, where it maintains that voltage at a constant level as it eases off on the amperage that's coming in there. This is important when we talk about electric vehicles, for example, because there's a lot of worrying with range anxiety and the like. How quickly can I charge my electric vehicle if I'm on the road? And what you're going to find with these fast charging stations is going in there and charging under the constant current may only take 10, 15 minutes. And you'll get to about 80% capacity on your battery. But then during that constant voltage where the amps are easing off, but the voltage is remaining fixed, until we get to a final stage where the battery is 100% full. Well, that may take several hours. So what you're going to find is you're going to go in, you're going to charge, and you're only going to fill up the tank essentially to about 80%, because rather than sitting there and waiting at the service station for several hours, you'll top it off when you're at home. So that's kind of how people are going to get into the charging world. Yeah, Bill, you had a question?
Yes, I was going to ask if lithium batteries are constant voltage and constant current, does that mean they're charged using a pulse width modulated algorithm?
I'm not sure. I don't know that. Since the lead acid battery process is similar, maybe, but I would just be guessing. Sorry, I know PWM is pretty much the standard in lead acid battery charging. I'm not sure if it's similar in lithium ion. Sorry.
Well, I'm asking the question. I don't know either.
Yeah. Anybody out there have any idea? I don't know if some of our battery charging guys are on the call. So something to check. Well, we did mention before that one thing to bear in mind is when you do buy a charger for the system, make sure it is compatible, with lithium ion, if that's what you're charging, or with lead acid, if that's what you're charging. Many of these chargers do both. So perhaps that's an indication. Pulse width modulation might be used in both systems, but that may be also very specific to that particular battery or that charger, I mean. That gives you a little bit closer look at that. All right. And then speaking of charging, I wanted to touch on charging rates. This can be confusing, at least it's confusing to me. Similar to my decimal point thing, I seem to have a issue around C ratings. And the C ratings on here are essentially 1 C basically means that in 1 hour, you're going to be charging from full or from empty to full, right? Conversely, you could be discharging at 1 C at that rate that goes from full to empty, right? So it's a charging or discharging rate. So 1 C is sort of our baseline. So if you have a 2 C charging rate, that means you're going to go from empty to full in 30 minutes. 5 C, of course, it would be 1/5 of an hour or 12 minutes. So the larger the C rating on these things, the quicker it's going to charge. Then you get into a 0.5 C or a C-2 versus 2 C. This is where some of my confusion comes in. C-2 is going to be 2 hours. C-5, 5 hours. C10, 10 hours. So those are how things are rated within the world of charging. And it's important to note that batteries have different amounts of capacity depending on how quickly they're being discharged. So that's something that when you're designing your system, let's say you put in a relatively small battery, but you're going to use it pretty quickly, but you've been told it has this amount of capacity. It may not have that amount of capacity because you may be discharging it too quickly. I think this diagram here talks a little bit about that. For example, the comparison of what is the amp hour capacity. If we go to the middle of the diagram here where it says C20, so basically if it is being discharged, and here they didn't put the slash in, which leads to some of my confusion. It's saying that, for instance, in this first battery, there's 130 amp hours of capacity if you discharge it over 20 hours. It has 105 amp hours of capacity if you discharge it over 5 hours. And it has only 74 amp hours of capacity if you discharge it over 1 hour from full to empty. So it's like, think about it like driving your car. If you're driving 100 miles an hour, you're going to get less gas mileage than if you're driving 30 miles an hour. It's the same car, it's the same gas, it's just less efficient when you're going at a faster rate. But if you then go all the way to the column here with the lead acid or with the lithium ion, it's showing that regardless of how quickly you discharge it, it's still going to have 100 amp hours. So at least according to their advertisement here, speed of discharge is not going to affect how quickly or how much capacity you have in that battery. So that may be an advantage to, of course, lithium ion in those situations. Then charging rates. One of the things that I think we're getting into a lot with these battery systems is talking about electric vehicles. And in this case, the charging rates, there is a limitation to how quickly you can charge a battery. So that's an issue that you've got to deal with. As I mentioned, discharging rates are going to affect how much capacity the battery has. Charging rates may determine whether you damage the battery or not. If you try and charge this thing too quickly, you may disrupt some of the internal capacity or the internal configuration of the battery. So I know I was looking up online, I'm going by memory right here, but I think you're really talking about 2C as the maximum, for some of these EVs. Sometimes they're claiming a little bit more. There were some articles about the dream of 1C, basically, can I charge my vehicle in 1 hour from empty to full? They're saying we can go to 2C, which means in half an hour we can go from empty to full. But that may be at the moment a bit of a pipe dream. If you're looking at a level 1 charger, which is the 120 volt charging station, the typical power output is going to be about 1 kilowatt, 1,000 watts. And for a hybrid vehicle, 5 to 6 hours. But if you're looking at about a battery electric vehicle, here they're saying from empty to full, it's going to take you like 50 hours. Well, that's not very practical. If you've got a Leaf or something like that, and you're going to plug it into a 120 outlet, then you've 50 hours to recharge. That's not very practical. That's why you get your level 2 chargers. Those are going to be your 240 volt units, and those operate often typically between 7,000 watts and 19,000 watts. For the hybrid, 1 to 2 hours. And I can tell you from my experience with the plug-in Prius, which is a hybrid vehicle, with the 120, it takes me about 7 hours to charge. With the 240, it takes an hour and a half, more or less. So those numbers seem right. For the battery, you're talking 4 to 10 hours from empty to full. That's, overnight. That's fairly good. But then when you get into the level 3 chargers, this is where you're talking about, they're saying 20 minutes to 1 hour for the empty to full charge with one of these. But as I mentioned, if your battery is not designed for this kind of juice coming into it, you may find that you've actually damaged the battery. So I would take that third column there with a bit of a grain of salt. A lot of this is all based on Tesla data, and I guess Tesla is focused quite heavily on recharging these things relatively quickly. So another issue I wanted to raise here was with cold, because I had always been told at one point, lithium-ion batteries are very robust when it comes to cold weather. You don't have to worry about it as much. With lead acid batteries, sometimes the electrolyte will freeze, especially if they're at a low state of charge. You get cells breaking. So cold weather, lithium ion, that was the thing. Well, that's not exactly the thing. They will operate in a fairly high range of temperatures, all the way from -4 degrees Fahrenheit up to about 140 degrees. That's a pretty wide range, although pretty much all of us, maybe not the 140 degrees, but I've experienced below -4 degrees. And this is one of the issues we were raising about the new standard that tells you got to put these batteries outside. There's going to have to be some temperature control in there. So that is their operating range. That means that they will indeed function. But how well will they function? Temperatures below freezing will reduce both the efficiency and the usable capacity of lead acid, for sure. You're only going to get about 70 to 80% of its capacity, of its rated capacity. But the same temperatures aren't going to affect lithium ion as much. And so I think this is where a lot of what I've always heard about lithium ion doing better in cold weather. Basically, their discharging is going to be pretty good when it's cold. Problem comes into charging, right? If you want to charge these batteries when it's cold, then you run into some problems. And mechanically, they're less stable, prone to failure. And the way you can mitigate some of this problem is simply slowing the rate of charging. You're not going to eliminate the problems altogether, but you can mitigate some of the charging issues by charging them very, very slowly in cold weather. Yeah, Bill, you got a question there?
Well, I was going to comment that I recently put in a small heat pump for my son on a farm. And apparently when I was talking with the heat pump installer, he was saying that he had just installed a very small heat pump for a fellow who has an off-grid system, and that the heat pump was being used to heat the battery bank to keep it within range. And I think that's a very clever idea. I know that a lot of the new EVs don't use resistance heating, but use heat pumps, small heat pumps for providing the power, the heating and cooling inside the EV. And I think the same thing can be done for managing the temperature inside a battery, an independent battery house.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of heated casings, cabinets for these things once people have to start installing them outdoors. In fact, I was just having a conversation with an installer. We were doing some work at Blue Rock Station, of course, is an Earthship, and it's built out of rammed earth tires. And we were thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to start building battery enclosures with rammed earth tires and like a living roof that essentially then you're below the frost line, so that the extreme cold and the extreme heat is mitigated. So perhaps you're talking about using a heat pump, but we're talking about using thermal mass to accomplish essentially the same thing, but in a passive way. So
good idea.
Yeah. So but of course, not everybody wants to go out and build a mound of earth in their front yard or wherever they're going to put these batteries. But, you can do it in an attractive way that, an old fashioned root cellar, for your batteries. So,
Jay?
Yeah.
I got a question. Is a cycle considered going from full to empty and then back to full 1, or is it 2?
It's a cycle is typically, and it doesn't necessarily mean full to empty, but it's your lowest point until you begin to recharge it again to the highest point and then back to the lowest point.
So it's 2.
That would be, no, from let's say from empty to empty would be 1 cycle.
Okay.
So it's almost like a waveform.
Okay.
From the
Yep.
bottom to the top to the bottom is 1 cycle.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's clear.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions, comments there? Those were some of the issues, and I just thought I know that with batteries is a huge issue and getting bigger. But I just thought we could touch base on some of these things because many of us think we know what we're talking about, and turns out we don't. I'm very, very in touch with that, and but other times just good to be refreshed because these things do behave differently. And, as we're moving out of the world of lead acid batteries, I think lithium ion is presenting us with a lot of opportunities, but it's also going to have a certain amount of challenges as well, such as the extreme cold. How do you deal with that? I mean, imagine with electric vehicle and you're driving, will electric vehicles ever be practical in Alaska, if you can't recharge them because it's extremely cold? How do you do that? So that's an issue there to deal with. All right. Anybody else have any comments before we call it a day? Okay.
Can I be heard? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm new. This is my first time with you, this group, but I just wondered if you'd explored any of the opportunities with the new forms of batteries, solid state batteries and such, and how they may affect the overall performance of the system.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of them. I've never used any of them. I think in many cases, oftentimes the new technologies are more theoretical than practical, but at the moment, I mean, I've seen articles about Toyota's experience or experimenting with solid state batteries. it has a lot of promise, but at the moment, I think it's just too expensive compared to the alternatives. So we don't see that widespread. But each of these technologies is addressing an issue, and maybe that will be the solution. I think most of us who look at this think of lithium ion as a bridge technology, that we are going from one thing that's been around for a good long while to maybe something else, but lithium is taking us through that period of time. So I think it's wise to just, now that period, that bridge period may be 20 years, who knows, 2 years, 30 years, I don't know. But I think it is a bridge technology to something else.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. All right. Okay, well, let's call it a day, and we'll see you guys all next Tuesday. All right.
Thanks,
Take care.
Jay.
Thank
Sure
you,
thing.
Jay.
Mhm.